This is a tutorial on how to query Power BI data with Power Automate and send that data in a styled, structured way to specific users. So we're going to do both a bulleted list and a table, a fancy formatted table. This is a bit of a departure from the last version of this I did where we sent a raw, unformatted table. So this one is going to be fancy. And we're going to start with the bulleted list because that one's a little bit more approachable. So let me show you what it looks like first. This is a scheduled flow. You can run it on any kind of periodic basis. I'm just going to manually run it so that we can see what it looks like without waiting for the schedule. So this is going to send each assignee in my data set a list of all of the tasks that they have outstanding and whatever data associated with those tasks that we want to. I'm using planner data here. You could use any data that you have in Power BI as long as you have a way to get the email addresses of the people that you want to send things to, right? So here's the email. Obviously, you can pick a more professional sounding email subject line, but it sends a fancy table. So this has a drop shadow on it with colored links that they can click to open the item. And same thing with the chat messages. So the chat messages come from a Flowbot. I have it displaying a bulleted list, but you can do a table too with the outstanding items that are clickable links. So notably, this does not require any kind of premium licensing. A normal Power Automate license will do it. And let's talk a little bit about what the limitations are with this method. So it is going to have a maximum of 1 million values that you pass to Power Automate and take action on. That's a lot. We're sending one row per message essentially right now, so per assignee. But it does take into account the number of columns you're sending in as well. So it's basically a multiplication of your number of rows times your number of columns. So let's go into how to do this. We're going to start with the bulleted list because it's quite a bit simpler. And then we'll go through how to do the table. So one of the first things you're going to want to do is make sure that you have a hyperlink available to use in your data set. So I'm just going to go to the transform data icon here. So in Power Query, we're going to essentially generate the hyperlink that the system uses to go to a specific record. And this is really going to depend on what kind of data you're working with from what system. But for Planner, if I open up a Planner task, you can see that it follows a very regular format. So this part's the same every time. And then you have parameters. So the group ID equals whatever, plan ID equals whatever, that you can insert values from your data to recreate this structure. So I'm just going to copy this first part here. My planner data set has data from multiple plans. So if you're only working with one plan, you can copy everything, including the plan ID over here. So if I go over to the right, so right up to the task ID. So in our tasks table, we are creating a link to the task. So I'm going to go to add column in the top menu here and do custom column. And it's okay to insert this step. I'm going to call this task hyperlink. And we're going to do double quotes and then paste in that part of the URL that's the same every time, ending in group ID equals. And then we're going to do an and sign and insert our group ID here and another and sign. So this and is concatenating our text and our values. And we're going to do double quotes, plan ID equals, and actually I need another and symbol inside here because when you're having multiple parameters, you need and after the first one. So we're going to do and plan ID equals another and plan ID value and another and task ID equals and task ID. So click OK. And then it's always good to try one of these to make sure they work before you are done. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. And it does. So it's worth noting that now that we have that URL, we can use it in our report in addition to sending it to Power Automate. So if I wanted to make my tasks clickable in this table over here, I just go to my hyperlink that we just added, and we need to set the data category for it. So I've selected it. We're going to change the data category to web URL. And then in our table, if I go to the little menu option next to task and go to conditional formatting, web URL, and have it get that task hyperlink. So first task hyperlink, click OK. Those are now clickable in this table. So back to Power Automate. The next thing we need to do is we need to structure our data in the way that we want Power Automate to use it. For me, I feel like it's easiest to send it one row per person we are sending a notification to, because that means that we don't have to do any kind of get distinct values and filter the arrays on the Power Automate side. It makes it a lot easier. So I'm going to drop the assignee ID in here. If you've got the email address for the person you're sending the notifications to, definitely use that. I just happen to not have the email address in my data set. This is the Microsoft 365 user ID, so we can use this to get their email address. And then I'm going to put the assignee name in just so you can see it, who we're sending things to. And then we need to write a measure that is going to essentially concatenate all the information in the way that we want. And the way that we style the information that's going into the notifications is going to be with HTML and CSS. So emails can display limited amounts of HTML and CSS. So all we need to do is wrap our data in that HTML. And then when we pass it, we just insert that into the Power Automate actions. So I'm going to make a measure. It doesn't really matter where we make it because it's not a column, it's a measure. So I'm going to drop it in here and I'm going to call this HTML bulleted list. So this is going to be a list of tasks with hyperlinks that are assigned to the user row. So I'm going to write the HTML. I'm going to do an unordered list, so double quotes and then UL like this, close the quotes. So this opens up our bulleted list basically, and then we need to concatenate. So I'm going to do an and, calculate, concatenate X, because this is so concatenate X is an iterator function. It's going to iterate over tasks and get all of the tasks for each assignee. And we're going to filter our tasks table where the task ID is in values, and then we're going to use the task ID on the assignee's dimension. So if you remember what our assignees table looked like, I'm going to bring it over here. We had which assignees were assigned to which task ID. So what this is doing is it's filtering our tasks table by which tasks are assigned to which person. If you have the person that you're sending the messages to in your main data table, you don't need to do all this. All you do is put in your table name in the place of all of this here. So it'd just be tasks like this and then a comma. All right. But because we have a multi-value field, we are going to use this to reference the related table and filter our tasks. So close our parentheses, comma, and now we need to enter the expression for what text we want to show. So this is going to be where we put in more HTML for our bulleted list. So I'm going to concatenate the list item HTML, so that's li. And if we want to do hyperlinks, the anchor tag goes in here too. So ahref equals, and then a single quote, because if we use double quotes here, it closes our concatenate string. So we're using single quotes. And then close this chunk, and we need an and. And now we pass it our hyperlink field. So that was, if I start typing hyperlink, it'll come up this one. And now we need to close our anchor tag. So I'm going to do another and. So double quotes, single quotes, and close tag, double quotes. So that was the opening tag for our anchor tag. Now we need to put in the task name that we want to use for the link text. So that's going to be another and our task name column, that one there. And now we need to close all of our HTML tags. So and double quotes. All right, so that's it for our expression. Now we need to do a comma, and it wants a delimiter. So just to make this a little bit more readable, you could put in a line break here. So that would be unicar 10, but really you don't need a delimiter per se. And then another comma, and you tell it how you want to order your list. So suggestions here would either be by task name or by due date or by start date, whatever you want. I'm going to do by due date. And then ascending or descending. So if you want the things that are overdue to be at the top, you would use ascending. And then we're going to close all of our parentheses, and we need to now close our unordered list tag. So that is and quotes /UL. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to drop that measure into our table visual, and I need to turn off totals on this visual. So let's go to totals and flip that off. All right, so I feel like this gives you a better idea of what's going on. So you can see that we have an unordered list, and then we have rows for each list item. And then here's the link text, close link, close list item. So this is our bulleted list. We're going to pass this to Power Automate. Power Automate is going to put it in an email, and everything from here on out becomes much easier. So at this point, we need to publish this report in order to query it with Power Automate, because Power Automate can only access things that are in the Power BI service. So I'm going to publish and then head on over to the maker portal for Power Automate. That's make.powerautomate.com. And just as an aside, if you are someone who makes flows from solutions, and if you don't know what a solution is, ignore this part. But if you make flows from solutions, I recommend making your flow here first and then adding it to your solution versus creating it from the solution, because there's one particular point at which you need to click on something, and for whatever reason, it doesn't show up in the Power Apps Maker portal. It only shows up in the Power Automate Maker portal. So I ran into that when I was making this video. So we're going to make a scheduled cloud flow. This is a flow that runs on some kind of periodic basis. If you want to, you could make an instant cloud flow instead. It doesn't really matter. However you want to trigger this is fine. Instant is going to be one that you have to click a button to trigger. So we're going to do scheduled. I'll call this. And then definitely change the repeat threshold. You don't want it to send every minute. I'm going to do once a week and uncheck most of these. I'll maybe do it on Wednesday. And you can select the time if you want to. All right, so I'm going to turn Copilot and the new designer off. The new designer, as of the time of this video, is still a little bit sketch. It doesn't do everything you need to be able to do. So I'm going to disable it for now. And then we are going to create a new step, and we're going to search for query Power BI data sets. So that's run a query against the data set and select our workspace. In my case, it's my personal workspace, but if you're doing this for anything remotely important, you want to put it in a shared workspace and select our data set. It's actually this one. And now we need some query text. So if you want to, you can write this yourself, or you can do what I do and copy it out of Power BI. So if we go to our report here and then go to the Optimize tab in the ribbon, and then turn on the Performance Analyzer, click on Start Recording, and then refresh visuals right here, and then go to our table. So each visual has a query that runs when the page is loaded. And so this table, if I open it up, I can click on Copy Query, and that will copy the query that the table is using. So it's worthwhile to note that if you make any changes to your table or to the filters on your page, you will need to recopy this query and then update your Power Automate flow. And actually, now that I think about it, I'm going to add a filter to this page. So you probably, when you're sending notifications about things, you probably have some content that you want to filter out of that data. So for example, if you're sending reminders to complete tasks, you don't want to include completed tasks in your query because you'd be notifying people that they need to complete something that's already done. So I'm going to grab my task status and drop that into filters on this page. And then I'm going to deselect complete. And then I'm going to rerun this query here. So refresh visuals and then copy the query again. So back over to Power Automate. I'm just going to paste this in the query text box here. And we're going to save it. And now we need to run this workflow in order to get something we need for the next step. So I'm going to just test it to run it, and we're going to run it manually. And run flow. Done. So if I open up this step here, you can see the inputs and the outputs. And for the outputs, I'm going to click on this Show Raw Output step here. What we want here is we want to copy the output so that we can run a parse JSON step on it. Parse JSON is going to make any of our table rows from our visual accessible to Power Automate, so we can insert them in various places. So the part of this that I want is going to be the body, and I don't want to include this word body. I just want the brackets next to body all the way down to the bottom here. I'm not going to take this comma. So we're going to copy that, and I'm going to close this, and we're going to go back and edit our flow with the edit button here, and we're going to add a new step. So our new step is going to be parse JSON. Parse JSON will make all of those table fields selectable. And for the content, we're going to give it the body. So the body is the result of the query execution. It's going to have all the data in it. First table rows, when I did a search on this, people say that this only returns half your data. So I wouldn't use this one. So use body, since that's the part we copied out of the output anyway, right? And then for the schema, if you click on generate from sample and paste in that content that we copied above, and then add an extra curly bracket, okay? Because we only copied part of the output, so I'm just gonna curly bracket at the end there, because we didn't copy the whole thing, so we missed the close bracket on it. Make sure there's no extra trailing commas or anything weird in here, and then click on done. And now we want to send a notification for every row in this output, because our table was set up to have one assignee or recipient or owner or whatever per row, and then has all of their data in that row. So we're going to do new step, and what we want here is a apply to each loop. So we're going to apply to each row from our Power BI query. The body from the run a query against the data set output has a structure to it. So we need to actually get all the way down to the row level in that output. So we're going to have to do a few loops to do this. So I'm going to rename this loop. So I'm going to say apply to each result. And then I'm going to drop in here results from our parse JSON. And then I'm going to do another loop. And we're going to loop over tables. And inside that, I'm going to do one more loop. And let me rename this actually. So this one is going to apply to each row. And now we're ready to actually do things with this data. I'm going to do the Teams message first. So we're going to do post a message, post message in a chatter channel. And we're going to do post as Flowbot and post in chat with Flowbot. This is the easiest way to use this particular action, in my opinion. The recipient, I'm going to give it the assignee ID. If you have an email address for a user, use that instead. But I have their Microsoft 365 ID, so I'm going to use that. And for the message, you can put some generic text in to introduce your content first. So we can say, please. And then I'm going to switch to the HTML code view. So that's this one here. And I'm going to insert our bulleted list. So this was the column on our table that had that concatenatex formula in it. And then we're going to save this and test it and make sure that everything is functional. So the flow run succeeded. I'm going to see what the notification looked like. And there's our notification. So it looks pretty good. I'm going to get the email in here now before we go and format everything as a table. So back over here, if we want to add in that email action, I would recommend doing one or the other, not both, but I want to show you how to do both. Add an action under that post a message. And for me, I need to get the email address of the assignee. If you already have the email address, you can skip this part. So I'm going to use get user profile and then enter in the assignee ID. Now we can send an email to that user. So send an email. Don't send an email v2. This one is going to look like it comes from you as a person, whoever is the flow owner. This send an email notification v3 comes from a generic email address. So for the to, If you have their email address, put it in here. I got it from the profile, so I'm going to use this mail here and enter a subject. And then in the body, do the same thing that we did for the message. Our HTML bulleted list. If you are testing this, I highly recommend putting your own email address or your own username in that slot first to test it and make sure that it works the way you want it to before you send it to a whole bunch of recipients. And one more note on the email. So if you go to this show advanced options, there's an option to add a CC or a BCC here. So you can use these also in kind of the same way that you use the to address. For the CC, I feel like if you have multiple people to CC, it might be easiest to concatenate those in Power BI in your table as a column, semicolon separated, and then you can just drop that card in here. All right, so now on to the fancy styled table. So the technique is going to be very similar, but we're going to have a little bit more styling for the individual rows, and we're going to put the rows into a table. The thing we need here is some HTML that looks good. So I'm going to use ChatGPT. I have a prompt that I've fiddled around with enough that I feel like works pretty well to get us started. So it is, please write us some HTML with inline CSS. So the inline is important because email can't really handle style tags in a lot of cases. So it needs to be putting the styling stuff into the actual HTML tags. And we tell it to make a fancy 3-column table with a width of 800 pixels. You can choose your font and your header and describe what the background color should be, what the font color should be. For me, I'm going with a light gray header and a specific color of a link. So this right here is a kind of a purple color. And I tell it very specifically to put all of the CSS directly into the HTML tags because it really wants to do the best practice thing, which is separating them out, but that won't work in emails, okay? And then I tell it to replace all of the double quotes with single quotes in the HTML that it gives us back. And that just makes it a lot easier to put into our DAX. And I tell it to add some padding just because I feel like that looks better. So when we give it this, it's going to give us back some HTML code, and we just copy that. I'm going to stick it into a text file. If you want to preview it, just save your text file as a .html file, and then you can open that in a browser to see what it looks like before you start pasting in the bits and pieces into Power BI. So I'm going to copy this, go to Notepad, paste it in, and save as. And I'm just going to add the file extension of .html to the end of it. Now when I open that, this is a preview of what it's going to look like. So back in our HTML file, I'm going to copy everything up to the TR tags that have the rows down here. So I'm just going to take this chunk right here that has our header titles in it. And we're going to go back to Power BI and create another measure. And this one is going to follow pretty much the same format we did last time. So I'm going to call it HTML table. And I'm going to put in double quotes that HTML that we just copied. And then do an and. And then we're going to do our concatenate X again. Actually, I'm going to calculate first. We'll do calculate, concatenate X, filter on tasks. And task ID is in values, and give it the task ID on our assignees table. Probably should have been named assignments in retrospect. Close a parentheses and a comma. And let's actually change our header titles. So up here, give it whatever header titles you want to use in your table. So I think I had task name, due dates, and status. So back down here, we're going to do our expression for what we want to put in our table rows. So I'm just going to go back over to the HTML that we copied. So for the rows, I'm going to copy this whole chunk here. So this is going to let us insert values in each of these cells. So I'm just going to paste this in here in double quotes and maybe format it a little bit so we can see what's going on. So we have our first one is our hyperlink column. That was our task name. So we need to get our task URL in here. So I'm going to take out this hashtag because we don't want that and put it in a double quotes and then an and to concatenate and then our URL. So that was hyperlink something. There we go, that one. And then an and another double quotes. And then we need to give it the task name for the link text right here. So I'm going to close double quotes here, erase this link one text, and put in our task name. Oops, I forgot the and. Task name. Another and, maybe a space in here. And then another double quotes here. And then same thing for these other two rows. So for the second row, that was the due date. So I'm going to do double quotes, erase item 2. The due date is a date field, and date fields are formatted on the front end in Power BI. It doesn't matter what your column formatting setting is. If you just feed it that date field, it's going to be formatted very strangely when Power Automate gets a hold of it. So we need to use format and format, and we need to give that the date field. This task due, and we need to tell it how we want to format it. So I'm going to say month, day, year, and double quotes. And now our status down here. So same thing again, double quotes around this, erase item, give it an and status, and double quotes. And then it closes the row and we need to finish off our concatenate X. So it wants a delimiter. So I can put a unicar 10 in here for readability in our table, but this doesn't really matter on the HTML side. Oops, I just did shift enter instead of enter. Now it's unhappy with me. Such is life. Okay, so we need to tell it how to sort. So we're going to sort by due date, ascending. So now that part should be happy, and we need to close our table tag in our HTML. So I'm going to do another and at the bottom here and close table. All right, let's see what that looks like in our visual. So drop that in there. So it looks okay. I want to do one more thing while we're in here. So you can, in addition to pulling rows for these emails, you can use your measures too. So we can take a count of the tasks that are not completed and stick that into the email if we want to. So let's do that. I'm going to put it on the bulleted list HTML because I feel like it looks better in there. So in our measure for our bulleted list, I'm going to go to the very bottom. You can put it at the top or the bottom, doesn't really matter. And do another and I'll do a paragraph tag. You could use a header tag or whatever you want in here. Maybe I'll do italic font for funsies. That's an I. And then close the quotes. And then we're going to put in a measure. So you could use any named measure you have here. I don't have very many in this data set because it's just tasks, but I'm going to do a calculate count rows tasks where the status is not equal to complete. So count of not complete tasks, and that'll be per person. We don't want it in the concatenate X formula that is pulling our task names and stuff because that'll put it in every single row. We just want one total at the bottom of our bulleted list. And we need to close these tags. Maybe I'll add a little bit more text too. So we're going to do double quotes, do a space so that there's a space after the number. Otherwise, it'll be mushed together. All right, let's see what this looks like. Okay, so we have our list, and at the bottom of the list for each person, it's going to say 8 active tasks. So now, because we have added a column to this table, we need to get a new DAX query for our Power Automate flow. So I'm going to do the optimize performance analyzer again, start recording, refresh visuals, and copy the query. And we also need to publish this because we need the changes that we've made to be in the service so that when Power Automate goes and gets them, the data is actually there. So I'm going to publish to my workspace, and I actually renamed this data set, so I'm going to have to go and update that in the flow too. But all right, so back in our flow, I'm going to replace the query text with what we copied in Power BI. And I'm going to run this now. We need to run it to get the schema that we need to feed the parse JSON step in order to be able to use these columns that we've added. So I'm just going to test it. Obviously, if you've put people's assignee names into your flow, replace it with your own email address before you run the test step, because you don't want to be spamming people while you test your flow. So this step is the one we want. So I'm going to get the outputs. And we're going to pull the body curly bracket down to the bottom here without the comma and edit our flow. And we're going to generate from sample and paste that in, add an extra curly bracket at the bottom, and done. So now when we go back in here where we were before, I'm going to go into the email. So Teams doesn't display the full HTML styling that you get with emails. So save the fancy styling for when you're sending emails. Keep it simple in Teams. Teams does do tables, but they're not, you don't get the drop shadow and stuff. So I'm going to take our bulleted list out and insert our table that we just made. HTML table, this one here. So it showed up. If it doesn't show up, it means that you forgot to update your parse JSON step or you forgot to publish your report, either one. So we've got our table in there. Let's save and test this. And we don't have to update anything with the bulleted list because we didn't add a column there. We just had to republish and it'll automatically grab whatever changes we did inside the measure. So here's our email. It looks pretty good. Looks like this one doesn't have a due date. It's probably because I don't have a due date in my data. That's fine. It's got the drop shadow. That's cool. And then our chat message has our count of active tasks. I've got 2 of these because I tested it twice when I was updating it. So you could do kind of crazy stuff with the measures here. So you could do a whole paragraph of dynamic content with styling and colors, and you could do conditional formatting on the table with an if statement if you wanted to get really fancy. This video is long enough already, so we're not going to go there today, but it's definitely possible to do. So thank you for watching. I hope this was interesting. I haven't seen anyone do this quite this way before, so I was excited to share it, and I hope you have a great day.